Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's great to see the room almost bulging. It's great to have had such a well-subscribed conference, and you're an amazingly punctual group, because I think 85% of people in the room here now probably were here no later than 9:10 this morning. So thanks very much for your punctuality. This is the second of our occasional series. We had a very interesting forum in Melbourne a couple of months ago on first-year student attrition, and so engaged that was between TEQSA and the academic community that we thought it would be good to try and make this a regular feature of the calendar for TEQSA. So this is our second in the series. I'm Nick Saunders. I'm the Chief Commissioner of TEQSA. Been there now 3 years. It feels like 3 weeks, really, but it's an amazing place and an amazing responsibility to have. But it's our pleasure today to talk about academic integrity and with a focus on contract cheating. And we're very, very fortunate to have Tracy Bretag here. Tracy's Associate Professor at the University of South Australia and is Director of the Office for Academic Integrity at the University of South Australia's Business School. And those of you who have got an interest in, long-standing interest in academic integrity will know that Tracy is an outstanding academic in that area. She has an international leadership reputation around the world for her work in academic integrity. Work that spans a number of years, has had a number of different foci, and has resulted in some very, very important publications, both academic publications as well as practical publications around the subject of academic integrity. So we're very fortunate, Tracy, to have you here today. Thanks very much to the University of New South Wales for allowing us to use their city venue. And thanks to the staff at TEQSA for organising the conference. As you know, these things don't just happen, and we do thank our staff for putting this forum on. One thing I might just comment on in terms of TEQSA's sort of focus on academic integrity, and we'll obviously get a chance to explore this much more during the panel questions and answers and panel discussion, is that we've had a number of questions since Tracy's report has come out, the best practice guide has come out, as to whether or not this states TEQSA's minimum expectations. In other words, is every provider meant to be exhibiting each and every one of those best practices? And obviously that's not the purpose of a best practice guide. The purpose of the best practice guide is to put out there examples of what we consider to be examples of very good behaviour, and it's up to providers to decide which, if any of those, that they would wish to adopt. So nobody should be, as listening today, thinking that our expectations are to get over this bar. You are in fact required to be doing each and every one of these things. We've already received a couple of questions for the panel discussion later this morning. So during Tracy's presentation and the Q&A after that, if questions do arise in your mind, please jot them down on a bit of paper and we can collect those up at morning tea time, and then the panel has some written questions as well as questions from the floor to respond to. Well, enough from me, and now it's over to Professor Bretag to talk to us about academic integrity and contract cheating. Welcome, Tracy.
A big thank you to Nick for giving me an extra 5 minutes. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I have timed my presentation, but 5 extra is always very good. What a great pleasure to be here today and to see you all. I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and to thank them for taking such great care of our nation, our beautiful lands, and to acknowledge the elders past and present. So, no PowerPoint for me today. Yay! I'm going to apologise to at least a dozen people in the room today who've probably heard me talk about this ad nauseum. You can have a little nap now for 20 minutes. You've heard it all before maybe. For those of you who haven't heard me speak before, maybe this will be some new stuff. If you've had a chance to read the Good Practice Note, you're on top of it, I think. So it is my great pleasure to be here today to discuss the Good Practice Note, addressing contract cheating to safeguard academic integrity. As I mentioned in the author's note, and as Nick mentioned, I've been working on this for a very long time, in fact, over 15 years. And so this document brings together so much of my thinking, my research, my publications, my collaborations, all into one document and focused on this emerging threat to higher education across the globe. Before I actually begin my presentation, I really want to take the opportunity to once again acknowledge all my collaborators, fellow researchers, colleagues who've worked with me over the years on this topic. Many of you are in the room today. I'm really scared that I might have forgotten to mention someone's names, but I'm pretty sure I've got everybody. So if you think, hey, did Tracy want to mention me? Check out the note. I've listed everyone. Chances are your name is there. And I also want to thank TEQSA for this enormous privilege. Writing the Good Practice Note really was a joy for me, and it was so great to collaborate with TEQSA and to have their backing on what I wrote. I was actually very scared when I submitted it, because, you know, as an academic, we put papers in all the time and you get all these revisions back. I just did one yesterday and I nearly cried, you know, with all the sort of fix this, change that. And they didn't do that. They were like, yeah, we like it. I was like, really? So that was pretty wonderful experience and not too many revisions, so I really liked that. Now, I've only got 20 or so minutes, maybe a few more, and I've already wasted 2, so I'll get cracking. So often, when we think of regulatory requirements in relation to academic integrity, we think only of those sections in the Higher Education Standards Framework which specifically mention those words. We're looking for those words. And we have section 5.2, academic and research integrity. Obviously, we're going to go straight there and look at what our requirements are as providers. But there are so many other sections throughout the higher education standards which relate to academic integrity. Now, most of us know that academic integrity underpins and encompasses other sections, such as research training, corporate monitoring and accountability, representation and information management, but also admissions, credit, recognition of prior learning, orientation and progression, learning outcomes and assessment, student grievances and complaints, course design, staffing, learning resources and educational support, monitoring, review and improvement, and delivery with other parties. Wow. Thank you, TEQSA. Thank you, Higher Education Standards. I agree. In other words, academic integrity is absolutely vital, absolutely central to everything we do as part of higher education. And I wrote that in the note. I said establishing a culture of integrity requires a holistic and multi-stakeholder approach which promotes integrity in every aspect of the academic enterprise. The Higher Education Standards Framework acknowledges that. You have to look for it. It's not just all listed under academic and research integrity, but it is there right throughout the whole document. So today we're talking about contract cheating, so I think it's worth having a definition. In our current research project, the Contract Cheating and Assessment Design Project, we have some members here, including Kath Ellis, who's in our research team, and Rogerson, who's part of our reference group. There might be others in the room. Anybody else hands up if you're part? Oh, Karen, didn't see you there. Karen Van Haringen is on our research team from Griffith University. So we have a number of people from that project here. You may have in your mind a definition of contract cheating which is a little bit different to this. So let's start on the same page. According to our research, we've said contract cheating occurs when a student submits work that has been completed by a third party. Completed by a third party, irrespective of that person's relationship with the student or whether they're paid or unpaid. Now, so often there are some researchers who only look at contract cheating when it's a professional service, a contract cheating site. Hey, we're all interested in that because that's the stuff that's in our face and that's the stuff that hurts us so bad when people pay for their assignments. But for us, it's about when students outsource their learning. They get somebody else to do the work. That's the thing that interests us, because our research found, in fact, that only between 10 and 17% of our cheating group in our survey of over 15,000 students said they actually paid someone. By and large, students are still using the old traditional way of outsourcing their work. Friends, family members, former students. Yeah? So we would ignore those stakeholders at our peril. It's not just the commercial cheat sites. So again, it occurs when a student submits work that has been completed by a third party, irrespective of their relationship with the student. So, given all of that, clearly contract cheating is not a new phenomenon, but many commentators maintain there's been a global rise in recent years. Now, it's pretty difficult to determine, we don't have a baseline, if there has been an actual rise in cheating. Cheating is a thing that's been happening from time immemorial, right? But I think anyone in education, higher education, all the people in this room would agree that over the last few years, there's been a proliferation of unscrupulous and marketing-savvy commercial cheat sites who target our most vulnerable students. And they offer quick and surprisingly cheap assistance with completing assignments. This is the thing that's in our face. We can say for sure there's been a global rise of those. We don't know that cheating has risen particularly, we don't know for sure about that, but we can see these cheat sites are in our face all the time, and they're in our students' faces all the time. So why does this matter? Well, if we believe that education matters, start nodding with me as I say this. I'm looking for nods. If we believe that education has the potential to transform individuals' lives and thereby society, if we believe that, and I think everyone in this room does believe that, yeah, then contract cheating has really serious ramifications. First and foremost, contract cheating undermines individuals' learning outcomes. It stops students from learning. If they're outsourcing the work, they're not learning. They're not getting the benefit of their education. That's the big thing that we see straight away. But the effects go well beyond the individual. Contract cheating undermines institutional reputations, educational standards and credibility, professional practice, and ultimately public safety. I had a call recently from somebody working in aviation who's very concerned about contract cheating in that discipline, and they were practically crying, asking for advice what to do when students are outsourcing their learning as everyone goes and gets back on a plane after this meeting. So quite rightly, community concerns have been raised, and in the context and immediate aftermath of the MyMaster scandal in 2015, this good practice note needed to be written. Teachers, senior managers, administrators, parents, and students themselves have been asking, what can we do to address this risk of contract cheating and the risk to the quality of our institutions and the higher education sector more broadly, not just in Australia, but right across the globe. So the Good Practice Note provides a brief overview of the literature on academic integrity generally and contract cheating specifically. The note discusses the prevalence of cheating, who cheats and why. If you've read the note, you'll see that none of these questions are easily answered. Have you read the note? Some nods, yay. Now I do know, here it is. I've got a copy, come see me after. I know that we had intended to have copies for all of you, but I was talking to Rosemary and you're going to have the opportunity to have it sent to you, the hard copy. Also, of course, it's pretty easy to find. I keep looking it up on the link, just go to TEQSA.gov.au and there it is. It's pretty easy, you can print it yourself. But handy to have. Somebody also called me and said, can I have, I'm not joking, can I have a cheat sheet, which tells me the main things from the Good Practice Note. I was like, it's not that complicated. There's like 22 recommendations, just read the headings and some good examples. Anyway, I'm not giving you a cheat sheet on the Good Practice Note. But so if you have read the note, you'll see that none of these questions about who cheats and why are easily answered because rates of self-reported cheating vary considerably according to different research methodologies and surveys. And one explanation for that is the question is asked in so many different ways. For example, in some surveys, students are asked whether they've ever engaged in the various forms of cheating, which may be taken to include primary, secondary and tertiary education. Yeah, fair enough. In other surveys, students are asked whether they've ever engaged in those behaviours in their specific institution. And then in still other surveys, they may be asked whether they'd ever engaged in those behaviours within a specified time period. So you can see, methodologically, it's quite tricky, and we certainly grappled with that in our own recent project. But based on our own results, and those from numerous surveys around the world, over many decades, many countries, we can say, really with some confidence, that between 5 and 10% of students admit to engaging in some form of contract cheating, some form of outsourcing their work, 5 to 10%. Now, this may seem like a pretty small number. You're like, man, I was so much more worried. I'm going back to my provost. I'm saying, don't you worry. 5 to 10% is not a big deal. And it does seem like a small number in comparison to those who admit to plagiarising. And all of us in this room over the last couple of decades have been talking about plagiarism a great deal. Certainly, I remember that's how I got interested in this topic. And when we talk about plagiarism, we're normally talking about cut and paste from various internet sources, right, without attribution. And the number of students who self-report engaging in that behaviour also ranges very widely, according to the research methodology, ranging from 20 to 80%. So when you wonder, we're worried about that. So you're thinking, so Trace, why are you worried about this 5 to 10%? What's the big deal? Well, I think there is a bit of a fuss and we should be making it because contract cheating is qualitatively different to most types of plagiarism in that it constitutes a form of fraud. It's deliberate. It's not because students don't know how to use a reference. It's not because students don't know how to paraphrase or summarise or use sources, although it may be those things. Those things may be behind it as well. But you have to make a deliberate, intentional effort to go and seek somebody else to completely outsource your work to them. The other thing is it's very difficult to detect if someone's written a bespoke essay for you. And it's unlikely to be remedied by education alone. We've all been working very hard over the last couple of decades, and universities and higher education providers have made great strides in providing the sorts of support our students need to avoid plagiarism. So this is something different again. And when you think, excuse me, of 5 to 10% of students admitting to outsourcing their work, that means that in a tutorial class of 20, perhaps at your institution you still have tutorials of 20, that would be nice if such small classes still exist. But if you think of a class of 20, that means there'll be 1 or 2 students who are deliberately outsourcing their work to a third party. Now, what happens in a tutorial size like that? 1 or 2 people are doing it, other people see it, they see the results, they see you don't get caught. We're worried that will become normalised as somehow the way you get assignments done. So often people talk about assessment. It's all about assessment. Teachers can fix it. You've just got to change your assessment. You've got to change it every semester. You've got to make it authentic, personalised, unique, and then it won't happen. Well, I love all those ideas. They're good. But our research has found that assessment alone won't solve this problem. Teachers by themselves cannot design out contract cheating. However, and I'm pleased to say, our research did find that there are some assessment types which are less likely, not impossible, but less likely to be outsourced, and they are reflections on practicums, although my colleague Kath is going to be on the panel later and she'll tell you she sees those online being bought and sold like everything else, so they still can be outsourced, but less likely to be outsourced. Oral defences of written work, so a viva. Good job if you have the resources to do vivas with your students. Assignments that relate to students' personal experience or something that's been individualised to that student. And again, Kat's going to tell you, we've seen some incredibly individualised assignments that are still being outsourced, but just remember it's less likely. And supervised assessments, which are completed in class. And we know there are some serious resource implications there. Not every assessment can be assessed in invigilated situations. But those are the 4 that are less likely to be outsourced. Now, we also, I might not have mentioned this, we also did a survey of teaching staff around the country. So our data is based on over 15,000 responses from students at 8 universities and 4 higher education providers, non-university providers. We also surveyed teaching staff at those institutions and we received around 1,200 responses. Again, quite a large number because nobody fills in a survey of 58 questions, myself included. So thanks everyone who filled that in. But what we found, somewhat paradoxically, is that teaching staff reported these assessments, these 4 less likely to be outsourced assessments, are the ones they use the least. Because they're tricky, they take a lot of work, it's very hard, it's resource intensive, no surprises there. So the ones that are less likely to be outsourced are the ones least likely to be set by teachers. So I think we can say we can make some improvements in that area. But as I said, assessment design is not alone, by itself, it's not the answer. But our research did find, through some really serious statistical analysis with our colleague Michael Burton at UWA, brilliant statistician, part of our project, our research found that there are 3 significant variables associated with contract cheating, and they are dissatisfaction with the teaching and learning environment, a perception that there are lots of opportunities to cheat. Not that there are lots of opportunities, but there is a perception that there is lots of opportunities to cheat, and if the student speaks a language other than English. Now that last point is nothing new. In fact, those 3 points are nothing new. We know that students, if they're dissatisfied with the teaching and learning environment and they see lots of opportunities to cheat and they're struggling in a second language, they are the most vulnerable students and they are targeted by those unscrupulous cheat sites. And particularly we know our second language learners have been grappling with this for some time. Every single survey, every single bit of research done on this topic shows us that second language learners are more vulnerable. But please don't misunderstand this finding. Our survey also found that it's not a cultural issue. Our domestic and our international, our second language learners all had comparable attitudes about the wrongness of these behaviours. They all said, yep, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. And what this makes me feel a little bit, well, it makes me feel sad, because what we know though is our second language learners are more vulnerable. They're being targeted by these unscrupulous cheat sites. They're more likely to self-report engaging in contract cheating, but they know it's wrong. That must make them feel pretty sick at heart. That must make them, lie awake at night feeling pretty bad about themselves. So it's not culture by itself. It's not that we have a different attitude. It's just that our students are struggling because they perhaps don't have the linguistic capacity to do the work at the appropriate level. Lots to say about that. Let's keep putting real resources in for our second language learners, both international and domestic. So, with these recent findings in mind and also corresponding to other research around the world, just checking the time, I'm good. The Good Practice Note provides 21 recommendations, and then the 22nd actually provides you with 8 longer case studies about how you might address contract cheating to safeguard academic integrity. And they respond to 5 critical areas identified by TEQSA. Those are policies to promote academic integrity, policies and procedures to address breaches, not just limited to contract cheating, actions to mitigate risks, guidance to all members of the community, and good practices to maintain academic integrity. So just very briefly, especially for those who haven't read the guide, let me quickly take you through those quick recommendations. In relation to policies to promote academic integrity, we all have them. I know certainly that every university has an academic integrity policy of some sort. What we don't all have is incorporated in that policy specific mention about what contract cheating is and what the likely consequences are. So we need to get to that. This is a relatively new thing we're only becoming aware of, so let's go back to our academic integrity policy and pop that information in. If you're wondering how to do it, check out Griffith University. They're a great example, and they're in the guide. But it's not just enough to stick it in your policy. Who reads the damn policy? No, I do. I think it's pretty good reading. My life is sad, but students don't read it, right? So we need to include information about academic integrity and contract cheating in all those other platforms that we have available to us. Online platforms, course outlines, learning modules. And I've suggested here that there's a mandatory course. I know there's going to be a question about this later and we'll address it. I think there needs to be a mandatory course for both staff and students. And a good example is from UWA, who won an ALTC award a few years ago for their Academic Conduct Essentials online program. If we care about this, we'll make sure everybody's got it covered. We care about occupational health and safety. We make sure every staff member does that, and that's part of our performance management. If we haven't done that, let's make academic integrity that important for all members of the academic community. We need to provide visual reminders to people. So it's not enough that we just put it all in those online spaces and in social media. That's great. But we need to actually be able to walk around campus and see signs everywhere telling us that academic integrity is important and also reminding us that contract cheating's a no-go. Lovely example there from Deakin University, who worked with their student union to develop a whole campaign around that. And that really takes us to the next point about working with our students, encouraging student-led, engaging activities to promote academic integrity more broadly. And just last week, we had the International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating. Which institutions engaged in that? I'm so sad. About 5, right? Wow, okay. Well, we were tweeting. It was fun. What was fun about that is students really got into it. Students, and there's all sorts of things. We developed scratchy cards so people could scratch it and win a prize. You know, what is contract cheating? What will happen? Other people, I know Deakin, they've got this spinning wheel where you spin it and see what happens if you get caught contract cheating. And it's like expulsion, suspension, expulsion. So that's a bit of fun. But working with your students to develop a a program. My students at UniSA developed this whole Snapchat thing. I'd never used Snapchat. So I was standing there with my phone trying to work it out. But students are the ones to lead the way. Have a look at what Deacon's been doing as one example. The next point is about policy and procedures to address breaches. So I mentioned before about the actual information, but we also, if we're going to talk about contract cheating in our policy, let's be brave. Let's state what the consequences are. Let's not pussyfoot around this. The literature suggests suspension when you outsource your work. I think that's appropriate. Of course, it's very difficult to substantiate, so you've got to get all your ducks in a row. But when you outsource your work, as I've mentioned before, it undermines so many things: the student's own learning, other students' potential learning, the institution's reputation. And people have said to me, wow, Tracy, all these years you've been talking about an educational approach and now you've become so punitive. What happened to you? Nothing happened to me. I think about suspension being an educational outcome. When a student is outsourcing their work to a third party, they're so unengaged in their learning, they don't know what they're doing there. Let's give them a break to think about it. Seriously, sometimes people say, thank God now I can just go and just chill for a minute, because it's just they're on this cycle of having to cheat because they're struggling so hard. 6 months off, provide all sorts of supports for those students to come back in. An academic integrity mentor or buddy is something we're doing at UniSA. Our ambassadors work with those students. We send them a welcoming email. We're so glad you've enrolled again. Come see us. Think about how you can support those students. We're not kicking them out. We're not punishing them. We're giving them a break to think about what they're really doing there. Maybe they're going to change their program. Maybe they won't come back to uni. Maybe they'll do something else. Maybe they'll go to TAFE. So there are many other options. But certainly the literature suggests suspension. But our research found, by and large, because we asked people what the general penalty was at their university, by and large, what students get is a warning. Counselling and a warning. That's the number one response from most universities. And you're kidding, right? Counselling and a warning? Yes, counselling and warning and something else. At the very least, a 0 for that assessment because they didn't do it. Anyway, that's what I've suggested in the thing. You may think I've lost my mind and I've become punitive. I really haven't. I hope I've persuaded you I'm not. We need to provide training on how to identify it. Now, I have to say, I was looking again at the QAA note, which came out a week after our document, and they actually specify some ideas for identifying. I'm like, oh, golly gosh, I wish I'd included that in our note. I said, please, universities, work it out, and I gave Anne Rogerson's great example, some good training to staff. There's also some great stuff at Curtin University, but the QAA note actually spells out some ways to identify it. There's lots of literature out there on that. Philip Dawson and Wendy Sutherland-Smith at Deakin are doing some great work about how you identify. But the other thing I like about the QAA document, not to give them such a big call out, is they also mention that we're looking at the balance of probabilities when we're looking at evidence. We're not out to prove beyond reasonable doubt, like in a criminal court of law. We're out to substantiate a claim of contract cheating, and that means on the balance of probabilities, the student did not complete the work. We don't have to prove that they paid Nick to do it. We don't have to prove that they got their sister to do it. We don't have to prove any of that. We have to substantiate on the balance of probabilities that the student did not complete the work. And the QAA gives some really solid examples of how to do that. So I think that's important. Great example also from, as I mentioned, from the University of Wollongong, from Anne's own work. Create a simple process for referring contract cheating cases. Now, there's a great example there from Curtin, and also about how you implement consistent responses, also from Curtin. Our research found, no surprises, that staff often don't refer cases because it's so difficult and so time-consuming and so exhausting and so convoluted, and then they don't hear back about what happens. And 6 months later or a year later, they're sitting on the stage and they see the student graduate and they're just grinding their teeth. Now, what that staff member may not know is the student did get suspended. They were suspended for 6 months and they've come back, but the staff member wasn't informed. So it's about a communication feedback loop, and that's certainly what our research found. You need to communicate outcomes of contract cheating and academic integrity breaches generally to the whole academic community. And I don't mean you say, Tracy Bretag, very bad, plagiarism 80%, got 0 for her assignment. But no, you can say, we had 10 cases of plagiarism, serious plagiarism in semester 5, and these were the outcomes. I have to say again, big shout out to Griffith University, just about the only courageous university I know who actually puts that out there. And I've suggested that that's an example of best practice. I think we need to say, because then people will have confidence in the process. Students will say, whoa, my university takes this seriously. Staff will say, I'm proud to work here because when this sort of cheating happens, action occurs. So taking that to the next level about actions to mitigate risk and to provide guidance on academic integrity, we need to provide consistent messages at all points. When I say all points, I mean at pathway colleges, universities and colleges such as Navitas colleges that provide a point into a university. They need to have the same processes in place, otherwise you're going to be confused. If you get away with it at this point in your diploma and then you come to university and suddenly that's a problem. Now there's a nice example from UniSA College who really follow UniSA's academic integrity policy very well. The 12th recommendation is to establish an office that deals specifically with this issue, with academic integrity. I could be biased. I'm loving my job at UniSA. I know that the University of Sydney also has an office for educational integrity. This has been suggested for many, many years. The Higher Education Academy even recommended this in 2011, that there be a specific office or committee or designated person with this role. Otherwise, who is ultimately responsible? The provost, of course, but the provost has a number of other responsibilities as well. Speaking for myself, from my own experience, after nearly 2 years in the role, it works. It's going so fantastically well. Inform all stakeholders about contract cheating. We all think we know what academic integrity is, but not everyone in the academic community really understands about contract cheating, so we need to get that word out. And that then goes to the next point about sharing that breach data with senior managers and decision makers. One of the ways that we were able to set up the Office for Academic Integrity in the business school at UniSA is I went to the PVC with data and I showed her, this is what's happening in these courses and this is what we're doing. And she just went, what do you need? So often we think our senior managers know this stuff, but they don't. And they don't have the data, you do. Make sure you share it with them. Provide training for all staff. And that doesn't just mean teachers. It means people who are supporting teachers, and it means people who are at the front line meeting with students. Our people at Campus Central or your main information point. Our facilities management staff. At UniSA, they're like my team now. They call me, they're like, Tracy, I've spotted a contract cheating website up in the toilets. Shall I move in now? I'm like, yes, yes. So, you know, they love it. They love to be part of this movement to prevent contract cheating. So get everyone involved. Everyone needs training about it. Obviously support teachers to address contract cheating, and Curtin University has a great little 20-minute, quickly check this little presentation and you'll know what you need to do. Make it at point of need, don't give them a 5-hour workshop, that's going to kill them, they've got no time. Really think how best to support teachers. I've said assessment design's not going to solve the problem, but it still is critical. Think about those 4 less likely to be outsourced assignments. Use text matching for both detection and education. Now, this is not a new bit of advice, but please do read the whole page of advice I've given on that in the good practice note, because what I have seen is really inconsistent practice across the sector about how Turnitin or other text matching software is used. Really, please check out the specific advice about what I think is best practice on using text matching software. Our recent research showed that students who self-reported cheating were more likely to be dissatisfied with the teaching and learning environment. I mentioned that before. So we really need to be thinking about how do we increase student satisfaction. We also did a factor analysis and found that students who cheat don't feel they have a personalised relationship with their lecturer. They don't know them. They can't approach them. The lecturer doesn't know who they are. They don't know their work. Also, all the work to date has shown that the more you know your student, the better you are at identifying contract cheating. In fact, our research found that that is the #1 way to identify contract cheating. Your knowledge of the student's academic ability and their linguistic ability. If you know who they are, you know what they're capable of, when you suddenly get the most beautiful bit of prose submitted to you, your hackles are going to be raised. Doesn't mean it is contract cheating, but it's something to investigate. So really develop good relationships with students. I gave an example there of CQ University, who I know put a lot of resources into that. I'm going to thank Kath for this recommendation, because this is something she's been saying to me over and over. We need to encourage conversations between staff and students about contract cheating. Our research found that the non-cheating students, the ones who would never think of outsourcing their work, are not worried. They're just not worried about it. Why? Perhaps they think, hey, that's your problem. You want to cheat, you're just cheating yourself. Me over here, I'm going to get a good degree, I'm going to do my good work. But often those students don't understand it's not a victimless crime. Your university's under siege, your degree program's under siege. You're going to be competing for a job with that person who cheated their way through. So we need to get the non-cheating students on site. The final recommendation was to collaborate across the whole sector. We're here in this room to do that, so that's a great first step. The International Day of Action Against Contract Cheating was another example. A third example is, I believe, as a sector, and I'm going to call on the DVCAs to push this, I keep pushing them, to really think about how we might make those commercial cheat sites illegal. Not because that's going to stop contract cheating, but because it sends a strong message to our students that it's not only unethical, but it's illegal. I provided 8 case studies provided by many of the people in this room about really good examples of good practice in their own institution and how they address the issue. And I've mentioned already the QAA document that came out almost straight after ours. Lucky we got in. What was that? I was like, did we coordinate this? And most of their recommendations really resonate so strongly with our document, and as they should, because many of the people on the advisory group are members of my research team. So I trust this very brief introduction has given you a useful overview of the good practice note, if you haven't already read it. I hope I have enticed you to read it in detail. If you need a cheat sheet, just look at those headings, that'll help you. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion because I know we'll have a chance to talk about so many more of these issues in detail. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Tracy, for starting the day with such an engaging and lively presentation. We've got about a bit less than 10 minutes for questions to Tracy before we head off for morning tea, but we've got an hour after morning tea for discussions with the panel, and Tracy knows already, if I haven't told you, you will be taking a leadership role on the panel. We're just the support cast. So do we have any questions for Tracy to start things off? We've got 2 hands up immediately. Can I go to you in the middle, sir?
Jonathan Tyler, University of Technology, Sydney. Are you aware of a university in Australia that allows a fining system similar to a motor vehicle infringement notice associated with cheating? And the reason why I ask is that for many of my colleagues, obviously...
Did you say fine, like payment? Fine.
No, sorry. We don't have a problem with UTS. I want you to...
No.
But no,
I just wanted to check the word used. A fine? Paying a fine?
No.
Oh.
But please let me...
Oh, sure, go on.
When I'm caught speeding, the police officer who has had 6 months training writes out a ticket, and I have the ability to challenge that in court or just to meet it. What I'd like to see is a similar system within a university where I catch a student cheating and I say, you've been cheating. I'm going to give you 0 marks for this, and if you want to appeal it, it's fine. You can go on and appeal it. But it would take out all the enormous effort I have to do in documenting it, improving the case, in matching it, and then often the penalty is just a 0 mark for the subject. But the idea is that the student would have the ability to appeal if they believe that they have been incorrectly doing. Another variation on it is you get somebody such as you. I come to you and I say, look, here's an assignment, I want to give it 0, and you go, yeah, you've met it, you've signed it off. It's the problem I see is that we think of cheating as being a major crime within a university. We treat it almost like murder, where you've got to gather the evidence and you've got to present the case and so on with it. While we all know that it is much greater than that, and perhaps if we could have that system where we got the kind of traffic infringement notice rather than where we have to take it to the Supreme Court and argue our case.
Thank you.
Wow, I have so much to say about that. Many universities do exactly that, and I don't like it. I'll tell you why. That's how it used to be in the past, where the lecturer, the academic, was God. They could say, it's cheating, I'm going to give you a 0. Appeal it if you like. And the student would be like, oh, it's worth 10%. Am I really going to appeal it? I'm going to make a big fuss. That would be a 0. They really didn't get much chance to, no due process, no sort of natural justice at all. The academic was God. In fact, I work a lot in South America, and the academic is definitely God there. They really resist any sort of central process. But the problem with that process is there's no central record then. That student may have, you're talking about minor plagiarism or whatever, I'm guessing at this point, because contract cheating is something so qualitatively different, as I've mentioned. I think it is appropriate to gather evidence to see if the student has outsourced the work, because that is the type of infringement that does require a very serious penalty, much more than 0 for the assessment. They didn't do the work, so they already got 0. But if you're talking about minor plagiarism, I'll give you an example. So in the UniSA Business School, and it's the context I know best, so please forgive me for talking about that. I know Griffith does a great job. I know Victoria University does a great job. University of Wollongong, Newcastle. A number of universities do great jobs at this. But when an academic identifies the sort of issue you're talking about, where the assignment seems to have been cut and pasted from a bunch of sources, is that what you're saying? You're talking about contract cheating? Well, for me, contract cheating has to go to the next level. Otherwise, what's going to happen is there's going to be a student outsourcing their work in assignment A. They're going to be in course 1. They're going to be doing it in course 3. They're going to be doing it in course 6. They'll keep getting 0, but they'll get through, actually, because assessments, worth 10%, 20%. They're going to get through. There's no central record. They can get right through to the very end, having outsourced all sorts of bits and pieces, most of which haven't been identified and haven't been dealt with appropriately or consistently. Now, you've given them a 0, somebody else is going to give them a much bigger penalty or a lesser penalty. So what we want is a consistent approach to really serious breaches. Yeah, go on.
When I get a traffic fine on the points in New South Wales, the same would apply with this, that it would be reported up in the system. And one of the safeguards is that you have a responsible academic officer sign off on it. So it's not just my decision, I don't like what the student's done.
Yeah, so really that's not so different to what's happening now. An academic will say, I have concerns about this assignment, I think X, Y, and Z. They go to an academic decision maker who's been trained really well, who has a lot of professional development, who understands the policy and who's going to apply it consistently, and then they'll liaise with that person about what will happen. You still need evidence. You can't just say, I've got a hunch that this student's outsourced it. You're still going to have evidence, I believe in a central system of record keeping, because then you can see right across the university, I mentioned this in the good practice note, about identifying hotspots. Some courses have a lot more contract cheating. Why? We don't always know. It might be the assessment type, it might be the student cohort, it might be the lecturer, so many variables. We can't identify those hotspots if the academic just gets to make the decision every time. Yeah.
So time for one more. Tony at the back.
Tony Baker from the Trove. I've actually chaired academic misconduct committees at a couple of universities over decades. And one thing, I think your presentation was wonderful, and the practice note is great as well, very helpful. But one thing I think I want to challenge you on is the issue of standard of proof. And you were saying balance of probabilities rather than beyond reasonable doubt. I must say I've always tended to think in terms of the beyond reasonable doubt standard for quite a practical reason. The students are very litigious, and if you're making a decision on balance of probabilities, they're almost certain they'll feel it. They're going to take it to the appeals committee, they're going to take it to the ombudsman, they're going to take it to the state ombudsman. So I've always wanted to see, if you like, black letter evidence around this area. And it means that it is difficult to prosecute. There certainly have been contract cheating cases that we've caught them red-handed because we can actually go onto the contract cheating website and find their request for the work. But it's actually getting harder because some of the contract cheating websites are now hiding behind paywalls, and you have to sign up as a member before you can I guess the argument I'm making is that I think unless we hold ourselves to a close to beyond reasonable doubt standard, we'll be subject to lots of appeals, and we're also subject to that, I guess, to pick up on John's point, and John is a colleague from those days, that you get that sort of suspicion is guilt, and I think we have to certainly move well beyond that.
Level of proof. Okay.
Totally agree that we get beyond suspicion. A hunch suspicion is not enough. That's why you do gather the evidence. What you just said exactly is the reason why balance of probabilities is better than the burden of proof being beyond reasonable doubt, because you can't prosecute. Hardly anybody ever then gets caught, contract cheating, unless you have access to, unless you have the receipt unless you've actually got the contract cheat sites information. And how often does that happen? Now, in my experience, it's happened a couple of times. And even then, when I've had a receipt, right, and the student's given it to me, they've come into the formal inquiry and said, oh, no, that was a mistake, I misunderstood, that's actually not for that and I didn't use it. It was just like, what? So even that doesn't work. Now, remember what our data has shown. Only between 10 and 17% of students actually pay for the contract cheating. By and large, it's coming from a range of other sources. So we're not going to get that documentary evidence. One of the things I love, I was chatting to Alan Tabor, the Director of Students and Academic Services at UniSA, and we talk about this endlessly, actually. It's the topic, which is why I liked the fact that QAA mentioned it. And Alan said to me, we're not a court of law. Our whole policy has an educative process. We are an educational community, so we write it into our policy. A student is not permitted to bring a lawyer into an academic integrity discussion, for example. They can bring another member of the community because it's an academic community issue. So let's keep it at the educational level. We are not police officers, we are not traffic cops, we're not lawyers. We are educators, and what we're trying to substantiate is if the student has done the learning. And that's why the balance of probabilities. We ask students to do a viva. Hey, so look, if, it doesn't look like you're writing, I don't think, but hey, tell me all about this. And we take the students through the assignment, line by line, as the QAA specifically mentions, and I agree, get the student to tell us the story. Now, I had a case recently where the student had 3 months and many, many meetings, and I thought, man, they must know that essay by now. At the very least, they've got the learning outcomes. You know what? They still hadn't engaged. They still didn't even know what was in that document. To me, that is evidentiary proof enough. I think the balance of probabilities is what we do in an academic community. We don't want to think of ourselves as a court of law. And I say to my staff, don't be afraid of appeals. Everyone says, oh, I couldn't prove it, and I just know they're going to appeal, so I'm not going to waste everyone's time. I'm like, you're not wasting time. We're changing culture. The word will get out, the students will have to go through this process, and if you want to appeal, you go right ahead, and we'll just keep presenting that evidence. But let's not be afraid of appeals.
Well, thanks very much, Tracy. Look, we're going to break for morning tea now, back at 10:45, and we've then got an hour, maybe a little more, for questions and answers to continue with the panel involved. Thanks again, Tracy, for such a wonderful presentation and getting this forum off to a great, energetic start.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony McLaren. I'm CEO of TEQSA, and I'm going to be chairing the Q&A session that we're about to begin on. Before I move formally into that, I've just got one request, which is that if you have a written question that you've been carefully crafting during the coffee break, then this is the time to give them over to my colleague Raf, who will be circulating among you. Hold your hand up if you have a question to hand in. I see one, yeah, and Raf will come and collect them, and then we'll add those to the ones that have been sent in advance. So thank you for that. We're about to now have the questions and answers with our panel. And my first task is to introduce the panel. Tracy, I think I can safely say, now needs no introduction, but she's on my immediate right. Next to her is my colleague Helen Ganeil. I do apologise. It is indeed Helen Ganeil, who is Senior Assessment Manager at TEQSA and is therefore in the front line from a TEQSA point of view in implementing the standards and judging how providers are performing against them. Next to Helen is Kath Ellis, who is Associate Professor at the University of New South Wales. So we are on home territory for you, Kath. And we thank again UNSW for hosting this. Kath's background, although in English literature, has increasingly moved in the direction of teaching and learning, and particularly the area of e-learning, assessment and feedback. So Kath will be bringing that perspective to bear on the discussions. Next to Kath is Ramesha Abaratne. And Ramesha, we're very grateful for you coming and joining the panel at relatively short notice, so we greatly appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Ramesha is International Officer on the UNSW Representative Councillor and is herself as you might conclude, an international student, Ramesha. It's great to have you on the panel. Thanks again very much for joining us. And again, bringing the panel to its conclusion at the far end there is Nick Saunders, who you met earlier on in the proceedings. And as Chief Commissioner, has the honour of making the final regulatory decisions in relation to the standards, providers, etc. So we've got a really good range of expertise on the panel. We're particularly glad to have a student representative. That's a theme that I'll refer to at the end of this when I mention something briefly about our forthcoming conference. However, to get things underway, what I'm going to do is passing over Tracy, who shared her thoughts with us in lively fashion before tea. I'm going to go straight now to Helen, and then to each of the panelists in turn, who'll just give us a few reflections about their perspective on the issues around academic integrity and contract cheating. And then we'll go into the Q&A. So Helen, do you want to start?
Thank you. Is this working? It is. Hi, everybody. So I'd like to start off by just also congratulating Tracy on what I think is a really fantastic publication and really, really fantastic starting point for providers. When you're looking at the standards and when you're wondering, you know, gosh, maybe this is an issue or what can we do, it just provides some really straightforward recommendations, a great audit baseline for you to look at your own organisation and say, which of these things are we doing well, which ones could we improve? So as an assessment manager, I analyse the evidence that comes in when people make an application for renewal of registration. So we look at the core standards and we look at the evidence. And here it's sort of not prescriptive. I wouldn't see the same thing coming from every single provider. So there's not like one thing that we say everyone has to be doing exactly this. The standards are a benchmark. They're a sort of a minimum threshold, I guess. Lots of people meet that threshold in different ways. And often it's really coming back to governance and risk management. This is a risk to your institution. Academic integrity and breaches of academic and research integrity represent a risk. So like any other risk, we like to know that you're aware of it, you're monitoring it, and that if you identify it, that is then feeding back into a risk management sort of approach. So if this is happening, how are you going to find out? How would you know if it's happening? What are your detection sort of strategies when it does happen? What does that feed into? Does that lead then to a review of policy, to increased staff training, to more engagement with the students? So it's much more about managing the risk. We understand that higher education providers, universities, HEPs, TAFEs, private providers, everyone has risks to their organisation, a myriad of risks. Some are academic, some are corporate, but for all of those risks, you should be managing them. And that's really what we're about. So we're not about saying, gosh, if you've ever had a breach of academic integrity, well, that's going to be really problematic. It's not like that at all. It's just about understanding your approach to it and how you're managing it. So I would really encourage everyone to interact with their case managers and just kind of talk to us. And, you know, we, like everyone else in this room, really genuinely value high quality tertiary education, and we want to help everybody get there.
Helen, thanks very much. So if I can now ask Kath, with your interest in assessment, we've already heard that assessment isn't the only answer.
Assessment design.
Assessment design. Over to you.
I'm actually going to stand up so I can actually see people. I'm probably looking into the bright light. Hi, I'm Kath. I'm Associate Dean for Education in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at UNSW, so welcome to UNSW on behalf of my other UNSW colleagues here. I think I'd extend what Helen just said. It is a risk to us as institutions, but I actually think it's bigger than that. I think it's a risk to higher education around the world as a sector. If public confidence in what we do is eroded, then we are absolutely selling a pup to students, and we need to be thinking carefully about that. Big message that I really want to emphasise from Tracy this morning is we need to raise awareness of it. Again, something that Helen has just said. My master means that as a sector in Australia, I think we are further ahead. I've just literally come off the plane on Wednesday from the UK, where the QAA report was released last week. They are behind us, and I think the US is behind them in terms of just knowing about this. The My Master scandal has given us a huge boost in this regard. There was nothing quite like being on the front page of the paper for 6 months or so. And quite a few people are nodding here because they work for an institution that was on the front page of the paper alongside us. that means that we have an awareness of it, which is higher than other parts of the sector around the globe. We have got a problem. Every institution has got a problem. There is no institution that is immune from this. And we have a sector-wide problem. It's happening here, it's happening in the States, it's happening in the UK, New Zealand, Canada. They don't cheat, bless them. They do a bit. New Zealand, United Arab Emirates, Fiji, South Africa, and that's just the Anglophone nations. So it's happening in Francophone nations. It's happening. We need a sector-wide solution, and we need a sector-wide approach. If my master taught us anything, it taught us that if we all approach this together, then the only harm that can come to us is if we don't handle the problem well. And therefore, it's not that we don't have... Having a problem is not the problem. It's not handling the problem well, which is the problem, if that makes sense. Yeah. Therefore, I think I really want to back Tracy up on this. We need to talk about it, and we need to think about the conversations we have with each other as institutions, with our regulatory body, with our peak body, with other universities. We need to talk about it amongst ourselves as professionals, as academics, as professional staff. We need to talk about it with our students, and our students need to talk about it with each other. And really compelling evidence from our survey, we're not talking about this enough. Assessment design, I really want to make this point. You cannot design this out. Sure, as my DVCA keeps saying to me, you cannot contract cheat landing a plane. Sure, I get that. But you can contract out the reflective log, you can contract out the exam, and no individual student is going to able to be assessed throughout their entire program on assessment designs that are impossible to contract cheat. And secondly, we don't want to design it out. Prevention is not actually a solution, because if students don't learn how to resist the temptation to cheat, and they walk out into the big bad world where temptations to cheat are everywhere, we're actually pushing the problem onto our graduate employers. We need to talk about risk with our students, not just the risk to us as an institution, but the risks they're taking, and there are lots of them. They've got risk of blackmail for the rest of their lives, the risk that they're providing to their employers, their graduate employers and their graduate employers' clients, the risk of getting caught. A lot of these contract cheating sites that they're using are not particularly trustworthy people. And finally, and I think this is just another point about assessment design, if people are thinking that it cannot be done in their assessment, if they think they can design it out, then they're going to be complacent and they're not going to look for it. That's a big, big message. And finally, this is a really important point for me, because this is ultimately about student welfare, and it's about learning, and it's about an educative opportunity. Ultimately, at our base, at our core, we are educational institutions. This is a serious mistake that students make, but it's a mistake from which they are entitled to learn. And I think we need to think about the legacy issue here. We need to be looking at the students who do this and asking them, how has it come to this? How is it that this is your best option at this point in your life? Have you cheated all the way through school? If so, you have little option but to cheat at university. Is it the language issue? We need to address the legacy and talk to students about how it has come to this, but we also need to talk to them about the legacy they are leaving for themselves that they will take into their professional world of work. Imagine if you're caught for this further down the line. We may develop tools, algorithms, whatever, that we can go back through our archives and find this at a later date. How will you feel about talking to your graduate employer about having your degree revoked after they've employed you? So the legacy issue here is important. There's lots of other things I could talk about, particularly contagion, but I'm going to stop there and invite questions on that one.
Kath, thank you for that. And I think you've introduced some very important themes there. I was shaken 2 years in a row at a big international conference to have the My Master incident mentioned on the conference floor, about 2,000 people there, and the conclusion being drawn that Australia had a particular problem with contract cheating. And you're absolutely right, but it's this dilemma about disclosure, which can sometimes suggest that the problem is particularly acute, versus trying to cover it up, which is clearly no solution whatsoever. And the international dimension, this is on the radar and agenda of a number of regulatory agencies in other jurisdictions now, and you mentioned QAA and the US, and there's been a lot of work published in both of those countries recently. Let's move on now to get a student perspective from Ramesha, and we'd heard earlier on, Ramesha, in the first part of the conference about some of the particular challenges faced on occasion by international students. But could you give us your initial viewpoint?
Yep. So, hello and good morning. I would first like to thank the panel for having me here, because obviously when addressing any issue, I believe it's very important to get to the grassroots of the issue if you're going to address it fruitfully. So cheating, as we know, is obviously not a very new topic. And I must warn you, I'm actually going to quote you several times. So this is actually very intimidating to have you in the panel because I've quoted you several times in my paper, and it's just like, please correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway. But yes, obviously cheating is not exactly new. It's been around for a long time. It's just that the methods that the students are using have obviously evolved and changed and become new. For this reason, contract cheating is one of the most simplest and the most sophisticated way of cheating at the moment, simply because it's a third party who's writing your paper, and obviously that's going to be a very, original writing, which is not going to be detected by Turnitin or any other software that's out there. So this makes it particularly impossible for the university to figure out if that is actually done by the student itself. I know I am very much aware of the online facilities that are out there providing services for the students, but for the lack of a better word, the smart students don't actually go to those websites. They go to their friends, relatives, or a friend of a friend through word of mouth. It's highly unlikely they would actually go to one of those services and put themselves out there and take that risk. So this is why this is even more problematic to actually figure out if they are presenting that that whatever written article and if it has actually been created by themselves. So a very good example of students being inclined to cheat is my conversation this morning with my friends. I had a lecture just before I turned here. So, and I told them that I'll be coming to this panel to discuss contract cheating. And almost immediately, their comment on that was, "Oh, ha ha ha! That's awesome. I wish I had someone else to do my assessments for me." So, I mean, these are all domestic students. My closest group of friends were all domestic students, even though I'm an international student. And so, they're the most highly. I mean, they perform really well at university. So I'm not in any way implying that they'd actually go to those services. They would kill me if they heard. But the fact that people are inclined to actually cheat is very problematic. And it's not necessarily just to do with international students. It's to do with both. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter which culture you belong to, which country you belong to. People are inclined to cheat just because of the pressure that they're under, just because of the daily commitment they go through, and just having a very hard time to keep up with those responsibilities. So the answer, or rather the question, shouldn't be how students cheat, but as to why students cheat. I think Kat touched on that matter as well. Obviously, it's not sufficient to just design the assessments, because that's never the answer. You can't you can't always say, oh, we're going to have a formal examination and have students under 24/7 monitoring. That fails. Yeah. So the answer to that is, I think you've touched this on the articles that I've gone through. So that's what I wanted to quote you on, actually.
Let's go for a good quote.
You detected 3 key aspects, which was that all the students in that cheating body have felt that the staff ensure that students understand assignment requirements. They haven't done that. Also, that the staff provided sufficient assessment of feedback. That hasn't been done. And the third one is that staff can be approached for assistance when needed. Yeah. These 3 key aspects is extremely important. It's really important that there's a very good relationship between the teacher and the student. So much so that the student can actually approach the teacher and address the issues that they have. So that they don't have to. That was a good quote. that feels good too. But I mean, I saw all these quotes in there, and I was like, I'm just gonna start reading not quote you directly, in case something's wrong out there. Oh, phew. But yes, so basically I think the answer is to create that very positive relationship between the teacher and the student. Because honestly, there is no way that you can write off this issue by simply saying, we're going to bring in new kind of assessment, we're going to bring in new software. There's apparently software out there. Cadmus.
Yeah.
That is not going to help, ladies and gentlemen, because students are quite smart and students are quite crafty in wanting to get away with doing the wrong thing. So if you actually want to address this, the right way to do it is to build that kind of relationship where the student can fall back on the teacher and approach them and answer those questions through them.
Ramesh, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Those comments seem to have been well received, at least by our panel. Nick, any immediate thoughts?
Oh, just a couple of comments really to reinforce what Tracy said so eloquently and so energetically in opening. First of all, to observe that academic integrity is very pervasive through all the standards. It's not just about the standards relating to academic integrity. It's really important that the standards are seen really as a part of, to describe the student journey from entry into university or higher education right through to graduation. So I think it's really important to realise that it's a very, very important thing. Secondly, to just remind people, there is a guidance note that TEQSA has issued on academic integrity. It goes beyond, well beyond contract cheating. But I think the nature of that guidance note really reinforces what Tracy was saying. I mean, you need a holistic approach. You need to engage staff and students, and indeed engaging staff is really important. We need to have a culture whereby teaching is valued, teacher-student relationships are valued, that this academic integrity is seen as an education matter as well as a matter to do with penalties and those sorts of things. And it's really important that we have appropriate professional development for our staff, and indeed we have student engagement. And there are wonderful examples in Australia and elsewhere about student leadership in academic integrity in terms of promoting that culture. So all of those things are really important. And lastly, policy, policy is really important. And in fact, Australia, I think, has shown great leadership internationally around this matter of academic integrity and policy development. But it's the implementation of the policies at the organisational level, at the individual academics level, at the school level, at the faculty level, at the corporate governance level. All of those things are really important, that we have not only good policies, but we implement them in an effective and uniform way. And I'm looking forward to hear the interaction now between the experts and the audience. So over to you, Anthony.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Nick. We do have some questions already, and I want to throw it open in a moment. But while you're just collecting your thoughts, I just wanted to kick off very quickly with mentioning something that hasn't yet emerged directly in the discussion that we've had so far, the presentation we've had so far, but I think certainly permeates the image of what's going on in contract cheating. And that's the role of technology and the capacity of technology to enable ever more sophisticated ways of cheating. A colleague of mine is fond of describing this as an arms race, you know. No sooner do the providers get on top of one particular form of technology than all those people out there who are running these sites have thought of other ways. And maybe, Kath, could I just kick that one in your direction?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kicked to me because I've done a lot of investigative work on some of these sites. Yeah, is that better? Sorry. I've done a lot of investigative work on these sites, and I think the technology is shifting and changing. A couple of key changes have happened in the last couple of years that have meant that this is, I think, ripe to explode. And that is, first of all, things like PayPal have make international currency transactions really, really easy. And I think there's now very compelling evidence that a lot of the work that's being done by these sites is being done in former British colonial nations, where there is an oversupply of well enough educated graduates They're not postgraduates, they're graduates from very low-ranking universities who are struggling to get graduate employment even in their own countries. And one thing they do know how to do really well is bang out an essay. And I point you to the work, the emerging work of someone we met in the Czech Republic called Chloe Walker, a PhD student at the University of Oxford, who's been doing some participant observation and ethnography in Kenya on this. And Kenya is an absolute hotspot for this. Software as a service, platform as a service, that you don't actually need to know how to build these websites anymore. You can pay $680 for somebody else to build it for you. And this is now an economy of abundance. So we've got this oversupply of people who are ready to do the work. They're prepared to take a very low fee for it. So the cost is plummeting, and therefore the value proposition for students is very, very compelling. And this technology has enabled this. It's very much like eBay. Essay Shark is very much like an eBay kind of technology. We've got a bunch of people who have something to sell and a bunch of people who want to buy that thing, and they star rate each other. So if you're interested in that kind of structure, that's more like eBay. Essay Shark is the one to have a look at. And then there are ones that are more like Uber. If you have something you want to buy, the person who grabs your order and is close enough and able to provide it quickly enough will give that one to you. And there's lots and lots of sites that function a bit more like Uber. So it's very similar to these Go Get Bikes, Uber, eBay, all these kinds of things. It's a very similar sharing economy that's meant that this is really booming. It's genuinely a global industry, and it's working at an industrial scale.
I'm just slightly reminded at the moment of that rather scary advert that's on TV at the moment saying the game has changed about, illegal downloading, etc. Because not all these platforms, aside from the ethical issues around cheating, not all these platforms are going to be safe platforms in an ID theft and those kinds of issues.
These places are not to be trusted.
Yeah.
Trust me on that one. They are not worried about the data security for their students. No. And students should know that. That's a risk conversation to have with students.
So, Tracy, earlier on you talked about this not being a victimless crime. I mean, actually, there are many types of victims here as well. And okay, I want to throw it open to the audience. First hand, when you ask a question, could you wait for the microphone to arrive? Because we are recording this. And if you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. There's a question just here.
Hi, Roger March, Bond University at the moment. Well, I've got multiple affiliations, so sorry. I'd just like to broaden the discussion for a moment. I'm looking at the words academic integrity, and then I'm thinking about contract cheating as outsourcing to a third party one's work. And then I'm thinking about the quality of lecturing. And I'm thinking about students who sit in a classroom and the lecturer walks in with his USB stick, sticks it in, and up pops the publisher's slides. There is absolutely no intellectual input by the lecturer. And the student's just sitting there and thinking, well, just a minute, he or she is outsourcing his work to teach me, and I'm going to be penalised for outsourcing my work. Now, I've been around the block a couple of times, both in public universities and private providers. And the more I go on, the more I'm amazed at the number of people who are prepared full-time academics and casuals, but I guess particularly casuals, who this is the way they teach. And it's very difficult to police exactly how someone teaches in the classroom. So I'm just broadening it to say, well, there's a culture of teaching and learning. Yes, contract cheating is an enormous challenge, but there are issues around the quality of teaching as well.
I'm just going to link that, before I ask for, I'm just going to link that to a question that's come in writing. Commenting on Tracy's point earlier on, that it's absolutely key to know your students and have a personal approach. A colleague has written to say, but how do you reconcile this with large class sizes, casualisation of teaching staff? So some of those pressures, and I think this does very much link with your question. Tracy, I'm going to ask you to start with a response to that, please.
Okay. I might stand up. Again, I have so much to say about this. It's a great question, Roger, and it's a great question from the floor. How do we reconcile this? What I will say is that it's evident from the resources that are not put into teaching and learning and the lack of recognition for good teaching, and even the fact that we've lost the OLT and we've lost funding for, national awards on teaching. That's the message that's very clear. Teaching doesn't matter. There was a great article in The Conversation this week. Was it Andrew Norton's article? They were talking about the complete lack of resources for good teaching. I'll tell you why, and I know you know why teachers will use the slides from a textbook, because they're not rewarded for doing anything else. They are rewarded for that paper that's going to get published, and they're back in their room frantically trying to do the revisions and get it published before the end of the year so it goes into their quantum. They will be rewarded for that, and they'll be rewarded handsomely. They won't be rewarded for really rethinking their assessment and really thinking about how to engage with students in the classroom, especially when we have a class of 500 or 1,000 students that come in, and this is this, death by PowerPoint. It's not even their PowerPoint. And then by the second week, we've got 500 students. By the third week, we've got 100 students. By the end of the study period, we've got 20 students sitting in the front taking notes. Students are voting with their feet. The lectures are boring. The slides are crap. They could just go and read the book themselves. My daughter's a doctor now, but she told me herself in medicine, they had a lecture at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning where the lecturer just read from those publisher slides. And she said, you know what, I'll get up at a time that suits me in my PJs, and I'm going to read that book more carefully. I can get the slides myself anyway. I'm going to read that book more carefully because that lecture is so inept, it's not useful. And that's in medicine, which we think would be so important and so applied. So until we put real resources into this, until we really say this matters, then everything is just rhetoric. We also asked on our teachers' survey about this issue, about class size impacting on their ability to deal with contract cheating, about resourcing, about recognition. Now, one of the recommendations in the Good Practice Note was about really recognising not just good teaching, but recognising champions for academic integrity. And for me, those two are one and the same. If you care about academic integrity, you care about learning, and you care about teaching, let's recognise and reward. And when I say recognise and reward, I even mean with money. With money. Let's put money into this. It doesn't happen. I was at a meeting last week where there was a discussion about the national awards, and there is no money anymore. There is no money for national awards. And people said, well, what about we give people a nice certificate? Well, do you think that would be enough? And there was a general consensus in the room that just tells you everything if that's where we've got to. Enormous amounts of money being put into research, enormous amounts of recognition and reward there. We know why teachers are not putting the time into their teaching. No reward. We know why students are walking out and not even attending classes anymore. And it's that lack of engagement then, which just has this chicken and egg and cyclical effect. Students not engaged, staff are not engaged. Why would students care? Why would they go and put all this effort into doing their work when clearly the lecturer is hardly present? So much.
Tracy, thank you. I'm going to just hold back because I want to, Helen, not so much wearing your TEQSA hat, but wearing your academic hat, your doctoral work, and then your academic work after that. I mean, is this a scenario that you recognise, those kinds of pressures?
I feel strange standing up, but I will stand up because I realised I couldn't see anyone at the back. So I am, as I call myself, a reformed academic now that I work for
in recovery.
In recovery, yeah. So I was an academic at ANU for 10 years, so I do have that experience, and I am completely aware of that pressure. And not to minimise or detract from that at all, because that is a crucial lever. What I would say is, I can't separate the two now that I'm TEQSA. I'm going to put my TEQSA hat on. One of the things we look at when we're looking at the institutional governance and quality assurance is, how are you monitoring that? That's why you should be looking every semester at every course you teach. What are the students saying? What's the data look like? Are you suddenly seeing a heap of academic breaches in one faculty? Well, what's going on in that faculty? Are students suddenly really unhappy with this one course? What's happening in that course? And again, it's not that sort of punitive. It's, we all essentially want the same thing, right? We all wish we had the time to do all these things and do them incredibly well. For the academic at the coalface, it's quite hard. You have a limited power in that. So I guess what we try and do is say to the institution, well, you've got to monitor that. You've got to be alert to that and make sure that academics are getting some support and are getting some time.
Thank you, Helen. I'd like to take another question, please. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mariella Herbestan from Macquarie Uni. Regarding the economy of paper mills and that the prices are going down, I would actually propose that the cheaper it gets, the less likely students are going to take up these options, because it reflects the value of the output, and I actually think that that's in our favour.
Yeah, Kath.
I just want to, sorry.
Straight in there.
I just want to reassure you can pay as much as you want for an essay. The quality, Oxbridge Writers is probably one of the quality ones from the UK. Generally speaking, that's about 400, 500 quid for an essay. But I'm looking at the sites that are competing on price. They're not competing on quality. You can get an 8-page essay due in a week in history or business or humanities discipline for about $76. So it's really hard for me to say the prices have actually dropped, because it's really hard to measure that. One of the things I'm doing is systematically keeping a log of, and a lot more research is now being published on price. But there are certainly quality sites out there where you can pay a lot of money to get a good quality product as well. So what I guess I'm arguing is, for people who are really desperate and hard up, this is now available to them in a way that it wasn't previously. So.
Thanks, Kath. I'd like to ask Ramesha on this, because you mentioned that when you were coming here, you told your fellow students that you were coming here to talk about contract cheating, and the reaction was awesome. Where can you get that? I mean, what's your general view? And we realise you're not talking about any particular institution. What's your general view?
Definitely not UNSW.
of the level of awareness. Do you think students are, because we hear about adverts being plastered across campuses and this kind of thing, are students generally aware that these services are available? What's your view on that?
Honestly, going back to the point of where the prices are dropping, it wouldn't matter. Just to make it absolutely clear, there are certain international students who just wish to pass. So as long as there's a written article that they can submit, they would submit it, just because they just want to get the 50%. In terms of the offers that are available, yes, students are very much aware of it, because there's internet just at the fingertips of their fingertips. So it's literally just typing out the specific keywords on Google and finding out a site. Obviously, this would mean they would fall into a lot of, very unsavory situations where they would be, cheated of their money and so on and so forth, which they're not really aware of until they actually get that experience. So while it's very easy to find the services, it's finding that right service that's the hard part. But obviously, that's not what we're trying to address here.
You're not suggesting a quality mark for contracts? No.
It's not a matter of finding the right service. It's the issue. It's the heart of the issue, where students actually feel the need to get these services from out there.
Well, Ramesha, I want to keep you on the stand, so to speak, if you don't mind, because I think you've raised a really important point, and it connects with a question that we've had submitted to us, which is, to what extent does what the questioner suggests might be over-assessment contribute to the pressures on students to engage in cheating, contract or otherwise? Does that resonate with you at all?
This goes back to what I said previously, which is that there is a lot of pressure on students at the moment with day-to-day responsibilities, with the responsibilities of being a student in the first place. Obviously, there's no way to design that issue out of it. So,
okay, that you can, Tracy. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that correctly, but basically, if I were to compare my two lectures, I'm doing a double degree in law and arts. So my law lectures are very small. And they're very, very, the lecturers always try to connect with the students because they're CP. So we always have to put our arms up and scream out the answers, because otherwise the chances will be lost. Class participation, sorry. I forget, people don't really know the lingo. Apologise. As opposed to that, my arts lectures have about 250 students, 500 students in my lectures. And as the weeks progress, you see students decrease to about 20 students by the final week. And that is very, very true. This is obviously because that lack of engagement, and obviously it goes back to the point where the teachers aren't obviously given the proper encouragement to engage with the students, and as a result, the students are not given the encouragement to engage with the teachers. So there is definitely a problem, and the way to solve that is to build on that relationship between the two.
Tracy, just wanted to
but
make a quick comment.
I just want to comment on that idea about over-assessment. Having just spent a number of months last year in South America, I can absolutely concur. Over-assessment also leads to cheating. In Chile, where I was, and in Mexico, students in a 16-week semester will have 30 assessments. 30. Now, they have no choice but to divvy it up amongst themselves and try to work out how to get through. So over-assessment is a big issue. But at the same time, under-assessment is equally problematic. So I've seen in some institutions, exactly, high stakes, Kath's giving me a nod, that's exactly what I've written down. In some institutions, we're down now to a small study period of, say, 10 weeks with just 2 assessments. Now, our research showed that students are more likely to outsource work when it's a high stakes assessment, because if it's worth 60, 70%, they're freaking out. As you quite rightly said, people are under terrible pressure. Now, if you only have 2 assessment points in a study period, both are going to be high stakes. You have no chance for any formative assessment, no chance to develop your thinking and work back on that feedback, which is so critical. So even the first assessment might only be worth 30 or 40. That's still pretty high stakes. You have no opportunity to fail, no opportunity to learn. So over-assessment's a problem, under-assessment's a huge problem.
Okay, so you've got to hit the sweet spot somewhere in between. One of your more controversial assertions earlier on, Tracy, was that where you said that some might think you'd gone punitive, was where you said that, you know, the automatic consequence of contract cheating, which is, in your view, beyond plagiarism because it involves fraud, should actually be suspension. I'm going to have a very unscientific show of hands. Who agrees with that proposition? And who disagrees? And who would be willing to say why they disagree? Thank you. Just wait for the microphone.
Sorry, Paul Crust from Excelsior College. We used to be known as the Wesley Institute. I'm the Director of Quality there. The one reservation I have about this is I do think that it means that the stakes are extraordinarily high for international students, because if that's the automatic penalty, then that puts them in a very, very difficult position. And I think that might stimulate behaviour in terms of concealing what they've done, or the educational outcome is possibly an issue. Now, I'd be really interested to hear your feedback on that, because that was the one thing that made me think, I want to say yes, but that's that one thing that I just wonder about.
I'm going to ask a former Vice-Chancellor whether suspension should be the automatic penalty. Nick?
If it's substantiated.
Of course.
Well, I was one that put my hand up. I do see contract cheating where there is a deliberate, substantiated episode where somebody contracts with another person to do their work and put it in for assessment. I see that as an order of magnitude higher and therefore deserving of greater penalty. I mean, I have a related question here, and that is the flow-on, the potential flow-on from there in terms of professional accreditation and registration of the graduate. In other words, if this is a practice that we think is abhorrent, that we should be applying automatic suspensions to students, what does that actually say then to our responsibilities of letting registration authorities know of one's concerns?
Can I just also come in one point that I thought was absolutely crucial, was that Tracy wasn't suggesting 6 months in the wilderness. It was 6 months with a heap of support to actually then bring those students back and have them be successful with integrity.
I think it was
wasn't suggesting expulsion either, which is what happens in the States.
I think you actually said it might in itself be an educative opportunity. Now, I know there's a question here at the front. There was a question about 2/3 of the way back. Yes. You first, sir, and then we'll come to the front.
Tony Baker from La Trobe. I just wanted to bring a case study to your attention which perhaps supports the idea that people involved in paper mills are not entirely moral. We've actually prosecuted a case of this kind where the person writing the essay actually dobbed in the student who'd actually requested the essay. So, so if you're going to avail yourself of these services, you are not safe.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to take up was the issue of sessionals. Somebody mentioned, with such a lot of teaching done by sessionals, that there is perhaps an issue of academic integrity and that the sessionals are perhaps not involved in that. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm a great advocate for sessionals, and I think sessionals can teach at least as well as continuing staff if they're given the right sort of support. The problem is they may not see academic integrity as being part of what the expectations are, and they might not feel empowered to work in that way. So I think if we want the sessionals, who I believe probably know the students better than certainly somebody lecturing to 400 people in a lecture theatre, if we want the sessionals to get involved in academic integrity, we need to make it part of the expectations and part of their training and explain to them how they bring these cases forward and so forth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. That's in there. Totally agree.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a,
Ramesh, would you like to...
So in terms of the earlier... Sorry.
Yeah, it is.
It doesn't work. It's not working.
That's good. Okay. Sorry, in terms of the earlier point about the international students, so honestly, I don't think some of the international students really understand the gravity of plagiarism or the consequences of being caught in that web. So it's really important to make them aware of what that really means at the very start. I know some of the universities actually do this, where there's, during the all week, where they bring in the students and actually give that orientation. But even that, it's important at the very first week, during that very first class, to sit down, make them sit down and actually tell them this is what plagiarism is and this is what you should not do, to make them understand that the proper thanks should be given to the dear author and that it's some way of actually recognizing those people so as not to use their words as your own. So I think it's not, sometimes it's not even trying to cheat the system. It's simply because they don't understand. So it's very important to make them understand that because they have the language barrier.
I think you may have helpfully answered one of our other written questions, which was really around what might be called the grey areas, blurred lines, so to speak, of proofreading services, editing services. At what point does that go beyond what might be regarded as acceptable and cross a line to where it's actually, in effect, providing, unauthorised assistance to a student in completing a piece of work.
Kath's got something to say about that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kath. Okay, and then I promise, come to your question.
I think Tracy and I are really acutely aware, and other people in the room who do research in this area. This area is full of grey areas, and one of the things we've got to be really careful about is drawing lines. When does collaboration become collusion? Is a really, really big one. We're always telling students to work together, and then they work together, and we hammer them for collusion. When does proofreading become editing, and when does editing become writing, and when does writing become contract cheating is another really important line. But one of the things that we've worked on throughout this project is what we're calling a number of slippery slope hypotheses. One of them is that legacy issue I talked about before. How have you slipped into this from your behaviours at school? But another one is, and we see, you can see contract cheating writers and where they work and where they hunt for their prey. But things like note sharing sites, things like editing sites, micro tutoring sites are places where contract cheating writers go to grab hold of people and then start offering to do their work for them. And I suspect a lot of students have slipped into this, where they're starting to outsource their learning by things like note sharing, editing, proofreading, translation services, those kinds of things. And then suddenly, before they know it, they're in this world. So the thing that I guess that supports us in terms of our research was students who engage in those sharing behaviours, like note sharing behaviours, are twice as likely to admit to doing contract cheating behaviours as well. So we really think that slippery slope is...
Kath, it also suggests that sites which are legitimate in terms of offering editing and proofreading, etc., themselves need to police more carefully what they might be advertising, what might be linking into their site,
So I just want to emphasise that a lot of the sites that students use to do this, like freelancing sites, Upworks, Airtasker, those kind of perfectly legitimate sites, eBay, perfectly legitimate sites. And I think from our experiences, and I look to Bron Green here, is that when we're investigating cases like that, often the people who work for those companies are very helpful and very happy to help because they don't like their perfectly legitimate sites being used for these really illegitimate reasons. So I think, and Bron's nodding, reaching out to these sites, but also encouraging them. But also I think another thing we need to be thinking about is the advertisers. I mean, you ask a student, if they write on Facebook Messenger that they're struggling with an essay they've got through the next day, an ad will pop up on Facebook. Yes. Facebook's taking a lot of, it's basically the only place these companies can advertise without regulation. WeChat's another one. And Facebook's getting a lot of money out of these sites, and I think we need to be turning to them as well.
A bigger issue there about the accountability of some of these enormous sites. Question from the floor. Thank you.
Liz Smith from CSU. I'm interested in just revisiting the automatic suspension for outsourcing work. In an effort to make consequences consistent at our university, we were looking at things like, if you do this, then this happens. If you do this, then this happens. The advice from our legal department was that it can't be as cut and dried as that, and there must be due consideration of every single case. So I'm interested in the views on the extent to which you do consider circumstances, and is there a difference in the student who outsources their work because their grandmother died last week, or the student who outsources their work who says, I didn't understand because I'm a first year, as opposed to the student who does exactly the same thing who's in their third year? Is the consequence the same, and how do you manage consistency of that?
There's consistency and there's fairness. And no one wants to suggest that we're not going to be fair to students. So when we talk, we're not talking about an automatic suspension. We're talking about a recommended outcome of suspension when a case has been substantiated. And that requires a whole process, right, before you substantiate it. But I'll give you an example. You're talking about mitigating circumstances. I run the formal inquiries in the UniSA Business School, and we deal with this issue very, very consistently, and probably have more experience in the university than anyone else. But we gather all the evidence. We have a number of different people on the panel as recommended in the guide. So it's not an individual decision. You have people from right across the university and various different stakeholders contributing to that decision. Let's assume the due process has been followed. You've got the evidence. And we had a situation like that, and the student came with an advocate. The other thing is we always recommend a student brings an advocate so that they have the support they need. Because you're going to have a consistent outcome. That doesn't mean it's automatic. There is no such thing as automatic outcome for any type of breach. So we had the situation, and all the evidence added up to outsourcing the work. We even had a receipt, because somebody else had dobbed the student in. We had a receipt where the student had bought an assignment. So we thought, this is going to be clear-cut, job done. We're like, thank God, this isn't going to take too long. The student came in and actually had further evidence to show that she'd bought it, but then she had freaked out and she had tried to rewrite it and she tried to put her own ideas, and they were like, that's still not too good. So we're still sort of agonising about what the right outcome could be. She hadn't used it in whole. But then further evidence came out that was really significant to us. She had not disclosed this to anybody else at the time. She was in a terrible situation of domestic violence that had been ongoing. She had no family support. She was an international student, had found herself in this bad situation, no one to help her, didn't know where to go. The day the assignment was due, she was in hospital. She was in hospital dealing from the violence. And she went online. She thought, I've got to get something in. I can't deal with anything. She bought the thing. But she didn't put it in. She tried to rewrite it. So in that case, that outcome after it was all substantiated. Again, this is not just a story. My grandma died for the third time this semester. This was substantiated. And what do you think the outcome was in that case? What would you guess, Liz?
Well, I assume that you were more lenient.
Yeah. In addition to putting her in touch with all of the services, which we do as well, every single case we have that goes through such a process gets in touch with all of our services, because one of the things we know is when we meet these students, for all the reasons that we've been talking about, they're usually in crisis, emotionally, intellectually, linguistically, and so on. This student, in fact, was allowed to resubmit that assignment following a whole bunch of support services that were put in place. So, yes, mitigating circumstances matter. There is no automatic penalty, but what we're saying is the recommended outcome based on a substantiated case with all the due process and evidence is that if you have found that, then a suspension with support to re-enrol is our recommendation. It's very different than an automatic, we think you've contract cheated and you're out.
Tracy, thanks for that. There's another question here. Thank you. It's on its way.
Hi, I'm Emma Power from the University of Sydney, Faculty of Health Sciences. What would really help me is, well, when you said things about contract cheating, I was thinking, my assessment's pretty good, which of course I know it's not foolproof, but there is a sense in some of the clinically oriented professions that the way we do assessments make them are naturally harder to cheat, naturally harder to outsource, and we must be quite complacent about that sometimes. What would really help me is a one-pager case study, expose of the things where actually you're wrong. It does happen. Here's a few examples. Because that jolted me into thinking there is nothing to stop a couple of students from years back finishing my assignments. Nothing.
Great. Kath, I think you want to comment.
Which one? How's that one? And Karen's here as well. I mean, we've done some analysis, which I'm writing up at the moment, where we've looked at some orders that have come through these contract cheating sites. I won't give you all the details about how we harvest those orders, but they're publicly available. And we've analysed 250 of those orders, and basically we're finding that even highly authentic assessment task designs, using all the literature on authentic assessment design, are still routinely ordered. Doesn't mean they've been filled, doesn't mean they've been submitted, but it does mean that students are at least moved to, motivated to, desperate enough to order this. Sure, I accept that there are some assessment designs you cannot contract cheat. I get that. But as I said earlier, there aren't going to be many students who will do a whole program of study without at least one or two assessment tasks that they can contract cheat out. So I guess one of the things that I'm trying to do is get that hard evidence down there that it is difficult, if not impossible, to design out and to really crack that complacency issue. But the really interesting thing that's emerged from my and Pearl and Karen's analysis of our data, they've looked at breach data, I've looked at orders, so the two ends of the spectrum, is there are some hotspots emerging in particular discipline areas and particular assessment types. And I think I can speak on both of us here, Karen, that it's particularly in business studies and in the social sciences and health, as another little hotspot. But and this is really, really important. One of the most important findings that I've had from my research and the work that we've done with the project is that students in different disciplines contract cheat in different ways. Engineers are doing it one way, med students are doing it another, social scientists are doing it another way. So if we approach this as if it's a one-size-fits-all solution, we're actually probably going to make the problem worse in some other areas. So assessment design, please do not get the message from me that an assessment design is not part of the solution. It is, but it is not the silver bullet that a lot of people think it is. And if they think it's a silver bullet, they'll be complacent and they won't be looking for it. But it still matters. It matters for pedagogical reasons. It matters for administrative reasons. But it also matters because you can certainly design it in. You can't design it out, but you can design it in. Does that help?
This was the appeal. This was your appeal for the one-page clear summary that you could distribute to colleagues.
Well, it's the job.
That's real.
That happens in a way that you can disseminate. So it's the dissemination.
Okay, here's a really quick jolt. If you tell people to Google their assessment task, just some words from the brief that they give the students, you'll almost certainly come up with an order. Because this is all, the RSS feeds that I'm harvesting are all actually blogs on WordPress sites. They're publicly available and you can Google them. So if you need a jolt, tell people to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to sit and do it now.
As we now come up to we're coming up into the last stretch of the session. So I'm going to ask for rapid fire questions and rapid fire responses from the panel. I can see at least two questions. First one here is here at the front. Then, okay, the microphone, you have the microphone, but I promise I'll come to you next.
Jonathan Stacey from Bark Institute.
Where are you?
Oh, sorry, here, yeah. To what extent do you think that the problem of contract cheating might be indicative that perhaps in some instances the admission requirements for university are perhaps a bit too low or inadequate, or maybe we're not assessing the right things to be able to get the right students for the right courses, because it constantly seems to be an individual choice that people make to contract cheat, and it's obviously quite a different psychological process in their mind compared to if they're just plagiarising something.
Yeah, great point. And it's, you know, the holistic point that Nick made about the standards. This is about the whole student cycle. What are the key points? I'm going to collect a couple of questions. So, gentleman at the front.
Hello, Ian Lang. I'm the Curriculum Director at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. We've heard conclusively from the panellists that it's it's almost a wicked problem to try and understand how to build in obstacles to contract cheating within curriculum. That begs the question then, does the responsibility for, say, attacking the websites that are providing this lie with a regulatory agency? Is it something that is within TEQSA's remit? I've talked with Nick Saunders during the break, and it seems that it's a power that would have to be brought from state to federal jurisdiction. And is it akin to the sort of clean food sell that Australia puts onto its own agricultural product that makes export education the third largest export industry in the country?
Okay, so that's a really good point about where does the power lie to actually take action against these sites.
Well,
and there's what I'm going to leave it there, and then there's one final question I'm going to take, and then I'm going to ask the panellists, going in order from Nick across, to give us your thoughts in response to those what will be three questions.
Hi, Angela Hill from Edith Cowan University. I'm really wanting to go back to a point that Ramesh made about students who don't need to pay. Students who have the cultural capital to engage with their parents, their friends, their networks, to actually get someone else to do the assignment for them. And I'm wondering if the focus on the purchasing actually masks that really profound issue around who has the cultural capital to actually do this in other ways. There's a volume of literature in secondary education that actually talks about the entrenched nature of parents helping their kids. And I'm wondering what role the sector has in actually bringing this conversation.
If you've got helpful parents, you don't need to go to a site because it's all on hand. So we have, is there a link to admissions requirements possibly being too low? Where does the responsibility lie for attacking and closing down these sites? And what about, how do we deal with the hidden issues of cultural capital, no payment has taken place? Nick?
So I'm just going to
pick
up the second question of Ian's, which is about penalties against those who are either marketing or providing the contract services. And the situation in Australia is that as a Commonwealth agency for TEQSA to act, we would have to be operating under Commonwealth law. That means that much of the law in Australia around fraud and those sorts of things is state-based. It would mean, therefore, there'd have to be referral of powers. Our advice has been that we do need such laws and such referrals so that there is criminal penalties available. New Zealand has such legislation. It's not federated, though, and so it's simpler. And the feedback we get is, although there have not been many prosecutions under that law, the actual prevalence of marketing and availability of such websites within New Zealand has gone down quite dramatically. So we think there should be laws written that are applicable across Australia.
Thanks, Nick.
I agree.
Ramesh.
Okay, I will answer the admissions question just because I had to recently comment on the second English test that's going to be implemented for the international students to test their level of adequacy in terms of the English language. So we do have an English test in place at the moment, which is the IELTS exam. And I was under the impression that faculties have different band scores, which is required for the students to get in. But I've recently found out that it also depends on the nationality. So this could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm putting this out to you. So while I was asked to get a 7.5 out of 9 to do at least a 7.5 to do the degree that I'm doing, a student from the mainland China was only asked to get 6.5. So obviously there needs to be a more standardized, the same level of intake requirement for students across the board, wherever they're coming from, because what they're going to learn is the same thing. Yeah. So I think this is obviously a very huge problem.
Okay.
And it goes back to the fact that there has to be one level of test where they would say, look, you need to get this amount of band score to get into this faculty.
I can tell from the murmur that you've said quite an important point off there. So, I'm Kath.
Sorry. I think I need, I'm looking to my colleagues from the law faculty and I don't think that's, anyway. Sorry, I might take that one offline. I'm just going to rapid fire answers. In terms of admissions, students contract cheat admissions essays as well, where they're required in the UK. So, in terms of the responsibility for attacking the websites, yes, I'd love to, but the jurisdictional problem is real. It's very likely that you can, and highly possible, you can have a Chinese mainland student studying at a US institution that goes to a website that's registered in Nobby's Beach, Queensland, but is being run by somebody out of Nairobi to pay for somebody who's working in Lahore but studied at a UK university to write their essay for them. So we've got a massive jurisdictional problem here. That just, and you whack it down and it'll just pop up somewhere else. If they don't pay their web hosting fees, somebody else grabs the domain name and you don't even know if you're dealing with the same company. So it's a massive jurisdictional problem. And finally, in terms of cultural capital, I completely agree. This is the legacy issue I was talking about before. My hunch is that the students who go to the sites I'm investigating are the ones that are so desperate because they have got no one else to turn to, which is why I think we need to be having conversations with the high schools, to have conversations with their students, to have conversations with their parents. And I think we need teenagers to be supported to say to mum and dad, I need to be able to do this on my own. Because once they get to uni, suddenly, if mum and dad have been doing their homework for them all the way through school, suddenly they have no option but to contract cheat.
Thank you, Kath. Helen.
Thanks. Well, I think the main one I'd like to talk to is admission, and the fact that the very first standard in the 168 standards is, I'll just read it quickly, that admissions policies ... are designed to ensure that admitted students have the academic preparation and proficiency in English needed to participate in their intended study. Don't set people up for failure, right? That is absolutely crucial, and that is the very first standard. And what was the last one? Was about social capital?
Cultural capital.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we know then that being first in family and coming from low SES and all those things are risk factors, which is why student support is also such a crucial part of the standard. So if you're going to bring those students in, and I think we can all agree philosophically that it's a wonderful thing to let those students have access to higher education, but we have to support them in that endeavour and make sure that they can do it and make sure that they know where to seek support, they know that it's okay to ask for help and that we're giving them the support they need.
Terrific. And the last word to Tracy, because Tracy, I knew you would have the last word. So please, over to you.
I was about to say everybody's covered it so well, there's nothing left to say. I do want to say, just in response to Ian's question about legislation against cheat sites, I agree with Nick. I think we need to be advocating for that. I also agree with Kath that, you're going to whack them down, they're going to pop back up again. But I don't think that's the issue. Whether we can prosecute successfully is not the issue. For me, it's about sending a very strong message to our students, if no one else, that they're illegal as well as unethical. I do think it does require a collaboration across the sector from non-university higher education providers and universities to say to every power that be, whether it's TEQSA, whether it's Universities Australia and other professional bodies, ACPET and so on, let's keep advocating, because as one voice we have a better chance of actually getting something in place. It's not just New Zealand that has it as illegal. There's 17 states in the US as well. And in Canada, they're trying to work on it as well. And in the UK, they even had it before the Parliament in January. It's not a dead issue. I think we should continue doing that and collaborate together rather than seeing ourselves as individual institutions. I think the work has to continue. Oh, thank you so much. Angela from Edith Cowan, I agree. I think we can get sidetracked by the fact that there are these unscrupulous cheat sites. As we said, as we found out in our research, we've got more data than anybody else in the world on this topic. Only 10 to 17% of those students who self-report that they outsource their work are paying for it. So by and large, there's still all those traditional sources of help. So we do need to be addressing that and not get waylaid by the sensational stuff, which of course is in our face, and it is distressing. We hate to think of people paying for it, but really the bigger issue is around students outsourcing their work to traditional providers. Yeah. And what was the third question? Oh, admissions. Without a doubt. We all know that, and it's constantly being discussed, in the sector. I think Helen said it perfectly well. TEQSA requires that. We know we require that. We are setting our students up to fail all the time. We have students who I often see in formal inquiries who cannot answer a simple question about what program are you studying? How did they get in? What happened? And it's not just, we have an IELTS as a requirement depending on the discipline, but we also have all these equivalencies to IELTS, which are much more difficult to monitor and regulate. So that issue has to be fixed. When we see students who can't even, they're lucky if they can fill their name in on the exam sheet. Seriously. No surprises they're contract cheating, but that's just about language. We're talking also about academic prerequisites and so on. Not every student should be pushed into university. There's been a lot of discussion this week around the vet sector. There's so many other options than university, and I think we're starting to realise that now. Thank you so much for your excellent questions and engagement with this topic. I really appreciate it.
Tracy, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And that's the first of several thanks I just want to give now. But can I say, in concluding, and drawing things to a close is easy because there have been so many questions and so much discussion from the panel. And I thank you all for the contributions, both on the day and the written questions we received in advance. I think we've managed to cover them all. So thank you very much to our panel for doing that. This is an issue now with which TEQSA has been seriously involved, really ever since the emergence of those articles and the media coverage about the difficulties and prevalence of contract cheating. We've had reference to the standards. Of course, there's Tracy's good practice guide, and I think it's really significant for TEQSA that we have published a guide, I think for the first time, which includes named examples of good practice from particular institutions. So it's really designed to be a supportive tool. Yes, we have a regulatory function, but we also, having an overview of the sector, have a function of bringing to the sector's attention examples of good practice. And it's been great to work in partnership with you, Tracy, to bring that to fruition. And also, of course, the guidance note and the guidance offered there and by our staff like Helen, who are always happy to engage in offering guidance around the interpretation of the standards. So we're approaching this on a number of different levels. This has been our second forum. There will be more, but more immediately, the next event I just wanted to mention to you, if you're not already aware of it, is the TEQSA Conference, Students Quality Success, 29th of November to 1st of December in Melbourne at the Grand Hyatt. It's a 3-day conference. Last year's was a day. That proved really incapable of coping with the demands. So it's going to be 3 days long, and we're very excited about that. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Glyn Davis is going to be there, Andrew Norton, Belinda Robertson, Andrew Van, Peter Shergold, Kwong Li Dao, and our own Nick Saunders, and a host of others as well. So if you haven't booked in for that, please do. All details on our website. Particular thanks, as I say, to our panel. We're very grateful for the contribution you've all made, and particularly to Tracy, of course, as the author of the Good Practice Guide. But also, can I just single out 2 members of our own TEQSA staff who've been particularly important. Poppy Bhavanankas, who's been really the driving force behind the organisation of this day. Thank you, Poppy, for that. You've done a great job. And Rosemary Marcon, who has done a fantastic job in shepherding through the guidance note, the good practice, arranging for seminars to take place for our own staff at TEQSA. So, Rosemary, thank you. You've really contributed a huge amount to bringing all of this together. I'll stop there, but thank you all, particularly you, for actually coming and attending and contributing so effectively. Thank you all very much indeed.